Join me in today's video as I work on my largest and most challenging project to date. So I'm going to start by printing myself a template of these guys to the size that I need them to be.
We're going to need an internal structure for this one, his Megatron, to show us where it's going to go. So we're going to put a baseboard under his feet, some just above the knees, some across his waist, and maybe one just under his chest too. Now these are going to be attached together using threaded rods, one through each leg and one that goes up the center of his body. Now these are going to be attached using nuts and washers, and we might even add an armature wire up through across his chest where his arms are going to go to hold those arms on. Now we do need to make all this structure food safe before we can start adding cake. Then we can add cake up through his legs, maybe some Rice Krispie treats in his thighs, some cake up through the part of his body. I've not decided yet for the rest of him whether we're going to do cake, Rice Krispies, or whether we might have to have something that's not actually edible inside his arms. Depends on the weight that we've got going on there. So that's our structure. Thanks, Megatron.
These are the threaded rods that I'm going to be using for inside the structure. And Richard's very kindly making me some boards to sit them on. So they're going to go on fairly large boards. Some extra bits of wood in there that we drill through just for extra support. So once the leg pieces are in, I'm going to have to connect them with a piece of wood which will go across the waist. I'm going to have to try and make this food safe as well. So we're going to add some cake cards to anywhere on the boards that the feet are going to sit. Do need to make these food safe, so we're going to cover these in hollow plastic food dowels. I'm also going to use a bit of armature wire for inside the arms. So this is what Megatron's going to look like. So it looks a bit weird at the moment, but it will start to take shape shortly. And we're going to create slightly different frames for each different one. So Richard's just cutting me some feet out for Bee, who's going to be freestanding. So he's going to need a few pieces of wood in his feet because he's not stuck to a board. This is just because I'm transporting them for this. But he does need to be made food safe, so I've covered him in some aluminium foil. And then what we're going to do for him is make some chocolate biscuit cake or some tiffin, depending on what you guys like to call it. So I've just melted some chocolate. I'm going to add a few bits and pieces to that, such as butter and golden syrup. And it's all going to be mixed in with some different biscuits, pieces of fudge. You can put pretty much whatever you like in there. I've also put in some white chocolate chips too. And I'm going to need this to set, and then we're going to cut it to shape. Now, the good thing with working with this is that it lasts a little bit longer than cake. So I will put cake in some parts of the Transformers, but to start with, I'm going to use the chocolate biscuit cake. It just gives me a good few days longer to get it iced without worrying about it going stale. So there's a lot of straight lines and edges in this one, guys, which usually I avoid straight lines at all costs. But when Paramount Pictures asked me if I'd be interested in making a Transformers cake, I couldn't say no because I'm a huge fan of Transformers and I am really looking forward to their new movie coming out very soon. Okay, so I am pushed together that chocolate biscuit cake. It has gone around that frame with some chocolate ganache. And then I'm going to move on to Megatron next. He's going to have cake in his legs. I'm going to stick it on with a bit of buttercream and we're just going to start piling it up with layers of buttercream in between. So my cake is actually frozen, guys. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to stack and carve if it is frozen. You don't have to have it frozen. I just find it a little bit easier to work with. And then once we've done that, I can cut it to shape and I can cover it in ganache. Who else is looking forward to the new Transformers film coming out? I cannot wait for Transformers 1, and it's going to be out in the cinema in the UK on the 11th of October, so I'll be going to see that. Let me know in the comments below, actually, who your favourite Transformer is. Whilst I was making this, I think Megatron was probably my favourite. Usually it's Optimus Prime, but yeah. Here's Megatron's thighs. We're going to stick them on with some Rice Krispie treats and marshmallows. The marshmallow is going to help it stick. Once your ganache is all set, you can then start to put fondant on. So I've coloured like a deep blue. At first I thought it was grey, but I think it might be like a deep blue for his legs. I'm using like a picture in the background to just look at for guidance. I didn't get things exactly the same as they were on the character in the film. I had to adapt and change a few things to make it a little bit easier for me to work on because there were so many straight lines and pieces to add that within the time frame, I had to kind of try and make things a little bit quicker. And I did carve down the Rice Krispies on the top of his thighs to get them to the right shape. So for Bee's legs, I'm going to cover them in black fondant. Just going to push in some little indentations under his shoe, so it looks like little treads under his feet. And then these little discs here. Now, I did think about making a car cake of Bee. Let me know in the comments below, should I still make a car cake of Bee? Is that something you guys would like to see? So these did take up quite a lot of fondant to cover them. It was almost impossible for me to get all the details on without sticking on the modelling chocolate and fondant now for this, guys. I did consider just covering them in ganache and painting the ganache with food colours, but I think it would have been really difficult to get the ganache to the exact shapes that I needed for each of these. So we've got chocolate biscuit cake in the bottom of Bee's legs, and the tops of the legs on him are just icing. Okay, so for Optimus Prime, I had to dye lots of blue icing, and you will notice that my hands are quite blue throughout the rest of the video, most of the video. So it's food colouring, I apologise for that, guys. Again, lots of different shaped pieces needed for this, lots of circles, straight lines again. For some parts, I even swapped to using some modelling paste, just so it was a little bit firmer so that the pieces would keep their shape when I was putting them on in place. And I think adding the little circles everywhere really made a difference. And of course, adding some shading as well. I'm using edible powder colours, but then I decided to swap for a bit of airbrushing, which covers it quicker. I'm just not quite as neat with the airbrushing. Also, I was able to give him a little bit of a metallic shine too. So this next bit was my favourite part of Optimus Prime's legs. I don't know why, I just felt like when I made these bits, I'm going to refer to them as ladders because I thought they looked a bit like ladders. Obviously, they're not ladders. But I just think they really made his legs look really cool. I used modelling paste for these, and then I enhanced them by adding a little bit of white edible pen for any bits that would show like a highlight where the light would reflect, and then also some black or dark grey edible dust as well on the parts that we want to look a little bit more like they're in shadows as well. I did get cornflour on everything throughout this video, guys. You will notice the white cornflour that I managed to get everywhere, and my blue fingers there, look. So they just slotted nicely into place in the front of the legs, and I can't tell you just how long these legs did take me to do. This was the longest part of the whole thing, I think, was doing Optimus Prime's legs. Actually, I know I said Megatron's my favourite when I was making this, but I think the favourite legs for me are definitely Optimus Prime. I spent the most amount of time on them, you might be able to tell. Watch the video and let me know which Transformers legs you like best. Okay, so I moved on to Elita's legs. Now, she had a lot of circles. There's probably a more technical, mechanical term for these than circles. But yeah, so many of these to make for her. But actually, her legs were quite complicated as well to make. I know I said Optimus Prime's were the most complicated. Hers actually were an awkward shape in the fact that I couldn't get cake inside them. So I could have made them in Rice Krispie treats, but actually I opted for her to be purely for show. So there's no cake in her. I actually didn't need a huge amount of cake for these, so I thought that within Optimus Prime, Megatron, and Bee, we had plenty of cake for everyone. They got a little bit trickier as they started to get taller, and it became more and more difficult for me to be able to reach. So I needed a chair, and at one point I even got on the kitchen counter, which it probably shouldn't do, so let's move everything back to the floor where I could. Now, some parts, like I've already mentioned with Elita, were not cake, mainly due to either the shape or the fact that they were heavy or just very awkward to put together. So some of those parts were the arms, and this was on every one of the Transformers. I opted for polystyrene in those arms, and I'll show you later in the video those arms going on. Back to the legs. So you'll notice I didn't do this in a nice order. I decorated them like a bit of legs, then someone else's legs, then a bit of the torso. I very much backwards and forwards in this. Lots of different shaped pieces going on everyone. Bee's body was probably the hardest shape to get. Obviously he turns into a car, so I needed to make his torso kind of look like it was the front end of the car, so we were aiming for a nice sort of smooth rounded shape there. And then he really comes to life a bit more when I add the shading. Again, more edible powders for darkening areas, and I also used a black edible pen to try and enhance some of those lines a bit more as well. He's got some big shoulders to add. More shading. So if you're an 80s kid like me, you probably get really excited about the fact that there's another Transformers film coming out. I absolutely love Transformers. I was so excited to be asked to do this project. It took me a lot longer than I was expecting, but I did enjoy it so much. I think if I were doing it again, I'd pick just one Transformer to make so that I could spend much longer concentrating on details on just one of them. If I were to do another one and do just one, which Transformer would you pick for me to create just one of? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, these guys are starting to take shape. I left the arms till last because I was not looking forward to doing those, so I kept just trying to work on other details, even getting the necks on, getting a bit of airbrushing for the colour on, which again made a huge difference to what they were looking like. There were a lot of late nights on this one, guys. I had to put pieces of paper in to protect the front part, my favourite part of his legs, from getting airbrush colour on them. I think the small details like the shading and just the adding the pen made such a big difference. And if I could do it again, I would like to probably print off more templates that I make for myself for creating like each individual piece of each robot. Are they robots? They are classed as robots, aren't they? Or are they just called aliens? They don't live on Earth anyway, do they? But they're not humans. Are they robots? I'm not sure. So you can see that Megatron's arms are massive. Now, I could have done these in cake. Like I say, I didn't need a huge amount of cake, but also making these in cake is very awkward. It's very heavy, and then working out how they're going to hang in what position, because he was going to have his arms crossed, which again, you can just about see on my laptop there. My laptop that has fingerprints all over it. This position of the arms was so awkward to do, so I put an armature wire in. I actually took the one off that I put on the cake frame earlier and decided it was going to be easier to just push it in at each side. Now I could do this because his body I actually made out of polystyrene as well. It's just so important that the polystyrene doesn't come into contact with the actual cake part in the legs, but I kept that all separated. But I think I definitely needed that armature wire to be able to bend his arms around it in place. And the polystyrene did keep it a little bit more lightweight, so it wasn't pulling down too much on the rest of him. I think we need a slight gold tinge to Optimus Prime's legs, and even a little bit on Bee's legs as well. Have you guys ever tried a Transformer cake before? Let me know in the comments below if you've ever made one, and if you found it easy or if you found it difficult. Let's just get Elita's hands on. Another part that I was trying to avoid, and I've left the best part till last, the faces. The faces were the bit that I was looking forward to the most. But I didn't want to make them too early because I didn't want to make them before I'd made the bodies and find that the heads were too small or too large. Okay, so I think Elita is just about done. Now, because it took me such a long time, Richard actually gave me a hand with creating the lettering for it. We just used some modelling paste so that it was nice and firm, and we just cut out templates and then he cut the letters to shape for me. So thank you, Richard, for helping me out with that. Okay, so the movie name is Transformers 1, and I need to make that one logo, I think. So we're going to make that out of that leftover chocolate biscuit cake that I made earlier. So we'll cut that to shape, and then I'm going to cover it in a thin layer of icing. Carefully cutting it out around the edges. I've just stick it down with some water, and then I'm just going to add some detailing, just with some modelling tools. Pressing in so that we get little impressions. Again, straight lines are not my thing, are they? I need to practice more at doing straight lines. And then trying to create the patterning to match the logo that they have, or the title from the movie. With a large brush and some edible powders, we're just going to gently rub over the edges. Okay, now we're on to the best part, the faces. I'm actually making up some gelatin for this. Now before it's fully set, I want to put it over a ball so that it sets in this shape. When it sets, which actually took a few days for that to set, so I actually made this part in advance. I'm going to put it over some polystyrene. Now, their heads are not going to be able to be edible because of what I'm doing with them. So I've put some eye holes in, and we're just going to use modelling paste for the faces so it keeps its shape. Now, each Transformer has a slightly different shaped face with different features, but they're all still made in similar ways. I like that I could stick on the nose for this. It's very difficult to sculpt a nose out of one piece for the face, so being able to stick it on made my life a lot easier. And then I need to cut out the eyes, because I want the eyes to have light shining through. Because in the movie posters and the trailers, they've got these really nice, bright, shiny eyes. And I'm going to do the same with all the characters, just concentrating on trying to give them each a slightly different shaped face or a different facial expression so that they don't all look the same. Oh, and that one's Optimus. So this one's Megatron. Made him look a little bit unhappy. And then Elita too. I actually made her face twice because I made it way too small the first time. Then we're going to need some small lights, and these are just going to go inside. I think that looks fab with the lights, and it wasn't too much work. You can see I've darkened the blue, and I just used a bit of edible pen on top of that set gelatin to create that darker blue. And then I'm going to add a bit of shading to the face, so some darker patches anywhere that would be in shadow, and even a little bit of white on any areas where the light would catch. I think Elita's face was actually my favourite one out of all the ones I made. And then it's on with giving them their helmets. So they're quite big, the helmets. It took a lot of icing and modeling paste. In fact, I think this project, I probably used more icing than I ever have done in a cake that's going to be eaten before. I know a lot of you guys don't like icing. So this one was made so it could be taken down to London for the cast to see for the premiere. Okay, so just adding some final little details to Megatron's hat, and then we'll just dust it up with a bit of colour to make it look a little bit less sort of flat looking. And his little earpieces too. What's the technical term for his earpieces? You can tell I don't actually know a lot about robots or mechanics or shapes. Which of the Transformers faces do you prefer the most out of the ones I've made? I'm finding it difficult to pick actually. Just stick it on the pieces that just go around her face. And I think these little bits just finish her off nicely. Okay, now to add them to the bodies. So I had to push a hole into the polystyrene first and then press these in place. Actually, now I'm almost finished. I think maybe I like Elita the best. So if you were having a Transformers cake, guys, would you pick to have chocolate biscuit cake in their legs, or would you go for Rice Krispies, or would you go for actual sponge cake? Let me know in the comments below.
The one I'm floating right now is Badassatron, which is actually pronounced Badassatron. Transform and roll out. That's what I'm talking about.
There they are all finished. I want to say a huge thank you to Paramount Pictures for asking me to create these cakes. I had a lot of fun, characters that I've loved for many, many years, and I am so excited to go see them in the new Transformers movie very soon. Thanks for watching.